Hi everyone, this week we'll talk about what emotion is and how it develops. Firstly, I want you to think a life without emotions. How would it be really? Just take a moment and think about it. Think that there are not any emotions. Really, what would happen? So please mention your ideas in the comments part. How do you imagine it? Imagine the world, the life without emotions. Let's think about it. Okay. For emotions, in the literature, you can find several definitions, several different definitions. For example, a source can define emotion as a complex pattern of changes, including physiological arousal, feelings, cognitive processes, and behavioral reactions made in response to a situation perceived to be personally significant. And also, emotions are defined as biological states associated with the nervous system, brought on by neurophysiological changes variously associated with thoughts, feelings, behavioral responses, and the degree of pleasure and displeasure. But when we consider the findings and the definitions in the literature, we see that actually there is not a specific consensus on the definition of emotions. So know about this. Even when we will talk about the classification of emotions, you will see that there is not any consensus on the classification of emotions as well. For example, we will talk about primary emotions. A theorist has defined, let's say, 5 primary emotions. Another researcher has defined 6, some 8, but we will consider the main points. And when you take into consideration these two different definitions, generally, when defining emotion, what we are going to refer to is that it is associated with nervous system and it is related to the cognition and it has some relationship with physical arousal. It has to do with our behaviors and they actually complete each other. They interact with each other, okay? You should know about this. And we see in the literature that generally emotions are intertwined with mood, temperament, personality, disposition, creativity, and motivation. But keep in mind the definition I have just mentioned. These are states associated with nervous system and interact together with cognition, thoughts, physiological reactions, and behaviors. These are important. Okay. Now we will mention about the components of emotions. Again, you will find several sources on components of emotions, but in our course, we will take Scherer's component process model of emotion. And as I've said, there may be several other definitions on the components of emotions, but we will follow Scherer's. According to Scherer's, there are 5 crucial elements and components of emotion. And from this component process perspective, emotional experience requires that all of these processes become coordinated and synchronized for a short period of time, driven by appraisal processes. You will see that all the components will interact together and act together. And although the inclusion of cognitive appraisal as one of the elements is slightly controversial, since some theorists make the assumption that emotion and cognition are separate but interacting systems, the component process model provides a sequence of events that effectively describes the coordination involved during an emotional episode. we will follow that cognition and emotion act together, okay? And when we consider the components of emotion, we firstly start with cognitive appraisal. This means that by our cognitions, we evaluate the events and objects, okay? As a result of our evaluation of the events and objects and the things going on around us, then emotions occur as a result of this cognitive appraisal, okay? And bodily symptoms. This model, cognitive process model, states that the physiological components, there are some physiological components emerging as a result of an emotional state, and we call them bodily symptoms. For example, when you get too much angry or anxious, you may sweat. This is a bodily response, bodily symptom aroused as a result of emotional state. And the third component is action tendencies. This is a motivational component for the preparation and direction of motor responses. Think that you are very angry at someone, okay? And you are very angry. And at that anger point, with the bodily symptoms aroused in your body, your blood will pump more and your energy level will increase. You will either get in a fight or go away, or for anger management, for example, we recommend to play basketball or to run or to do some physical activities to manage, okay? So, or in a fair situation, you will fight or flight, right? Your basic response will be those. So, every emotional state requires an action. And these are in interaction with each other. And expression, when we are talking about expression, we say that facial and vocal expressions are important, and they mostly accompany an emotional state to communicate the reaction and intention of actions. If emotions are not expressed, either vocally or facially, we cannot understand them, right? And the last component is feelings. And the feelings is a subjective experience of emotional state once it has occurred. Okay. And here, according to you, what is the difference between an emotion and a feeling? Search for this and write down the comment parts, please. And let's go on with the classification of emotions. As I've said before, when you check the literature, you will see that there are several classifications of emotions. But we will follow Paul Ekman's proposition. Paul Ekman is a popular and well-known theorist in the field of emotions, so we will follow his consideration. For more than 40 years, Paul Ekman has supported the view that emotions are discrete, measurable, and physiologically distinct states. And Ekman's most influential work revolved around the finding that certain emotions appear to be universally recognized, even in cultures that were pre-literate and could not have learned associations for facial expressions through media. And another classic study found that when participants contorted their facial muscles into distinct facial expressions, they reported subjective and physiological experiences that matched the distinct facial expressions. So even in tribes that don't see anyone else, who don't have any technology to follow social media, etc., they have found that certain emotions are universally recognized and the expressions have some commonality in all people who never know each other. Okay? And according to Ekman's classification, there are 6 basic primary emotions, which are anger, disgust, fear, happiness, sadness, and surprise. But later in his career, Ekman theorized that other universal emotions may exist beyond these 6 emotions. And in light of this, recent cross-cultural studies led by Daniel Cordaro and Deicher Keltner, both are the former students of Ekman, they extended the list of universal emotions. And in addition to the original 6 basic emotions, they provided evidence for the emotions of amusement, awe, contentment, desire, embarrassment, pain, relief, and sympathy, which are observable in both facial and vocal expressions. They also found evidence for boredom, confusion, interest, pride, and shame facial expressions, as well as contempt, interest, relief, and triumph vocal expressions. Okay? And Robert Plachnik agreed with Ekman's biologically driven perspective, but he developed the wheel of emotions, suggesting 8 primary emotions but grouped on a positive or negative basis, which are joy versus sadness, anger versus fear, trust versus disgust, and surprise versus anticipation. And overall, some basic emotions can be modified to form complex emotions. The complex emotions could arise from cultural conditioning or association combined with the basic emotions like primary colors coming together and forming secondary colors. These primary emotions could come together and provide a spectrum of human emotional experience. Okay, for example, anger, disgust can come together and could blend to form contempt. So there are always relationships between different emotions as well. Now we will talk about the development of emotions. Sroff believes that specific, discrete emotions don't begin to appear until about 2 to 3 months. Before this, he defends that in order for discrete emotions to emerge, to appear, there must be sufficient cognitive ability to allow consciousness, plus the ability to distinguish the self from others. So emotional experiences come about through recognition and appraisal and highly dependent on cognitive development. Remember that when we were talking about the components of emotion, we said that it is controversial if cognitive appraisal is part of an emotion or not, but there are discussions on this topic, but we will follow the logic that Yes, it's a component of emotion. And to go on with the development of emotions, the first affective responses are feelings, which are unprocessed responses to sensorial qualities and or physiological changes. Think of a baby. They are mostly concentrating on what they sense and they react to the physiological changes. And since these are, they are diffuse and mostly occur in pre-verbal children, being overrun by this type of affective light may lead to loss of equilibrium, the balance. Okay? And this can be dealt with the development of emotions, which for Giblin are overt, physiological or behavioral responses directed toward changing the environment. And they vary according to the situation and appraisal and represent an attempt to maintain stability. Giblin believes that there are 5 stages in the development of emotions. From birth to 8 months, there is disequilibrium from sudden or intense sensory sensations. And remember that in these periods, reflexive adjustments follow. So, in this period, mostly the expressions represent pleasure or displeasure, sleep or tension. Okay? From 9 to 12 months, there also develops disequilibrium brought about the presence or absence of other people. And equilibrium is achieved by interaction. And the diffuse chaos is replaced by more organized responses. So, the presence or absence of other people, especially the caregivers, from 9 to 12 months, this disequilibrium is dealt with the development of some interaction. Okay, and from 2 to 6 years, this equilibrium is caused directly and indirectly by stimuli, and equilibrium is regained through representational skills and emotional skills. We start to expect expression of emotions more effectively and verbally. From 7 to 12 years, this equilibrium comes through immediate perception and social comparisons with others, and emotional responses involve characteristic behavior patterns. And after 13 years, this equilibrium comes through internal comparisons, and emotions start to contribute to the stable conception of the self, particularly through prevailing moods and attitudes. Think of adolescence. So, according to Giblin's proposition, there is a disequilibrium which occurs at each stage of development, and the equilibrium is provided through the stages of development of emotions, step by step. When we consider Lewis' assumption on the development of emotion, he assumes that the child is born with bipolar emotional reactions, distress and pleasure, although he also suggests that a state that intervenes between the two is of interest. By 3 months, he states that joy, sadness, and disgust, in, of course, primitive form appear. And he states that between 2 and 4 months, anger starts to appear. At about 7 to 8 months, children begin to show fearfulness, which requires even more cognitive involvement and certain ability to compare an existing stimulus with another, for example, a stranger with a familiar face. And also in the first 6 months, surprise starts to occur. Sometime in the second half year of life, consciousness develops and allows the emergence of a new class of emotions those that are self-conscious. They are embarrassment, empathy, and envy. Following from this is that Lewis termed the self-conscious evaluative emotions, and they are pride, shame, and guilt. For these emotions, a sense of self has to be compared against other standards. Here, the other standards refer to norms, rules, and other children's behavior, okay, their observations and the feedback they get from the external environment. And another development that occurs between the ages of about 4 and 6 is the child's realization that emotional expression might not correspond or be an exact reflection of emotional state. What this means is that you are in an emotional state, but between the ages of 4 and 6, you learn not to express the emotion you are feeling. Okay, maybe you are sad, but you look happy. Okay, the emotional expression and your emotional state may not fit. You can manipulate it. And at about age 6 or 7, moral standards begin to play a part in the child's understanding of emotion. For example, although objects might be desirable, pursuing them in socially unacceptable ways might not bring happiness. This understanding, along with the development of cognition, comes along. Okay, overall, we mentioned about the definition of emotion and how it is classified in the literature. We follow Paul Ekman's strategy, and we also talked about definition, components, and classification of emotions. And afterwards, we talked about the development of emotions, especially in infancy. If you have any questions, please write me. You can write them under comments part in the YouTube video, or you can email me. See you in our next session. Bye bye.